Good afternoon, friends. I'd like to welcome you today to What's in Tegan's Storage Locker. It's the show that dares to ask the question, just what is in my storage locker? The answer today, well, friends, the answer is comic books. The answer is always going to be comic books. I grab a fistful of comic books from my surroundings. We go through them here on the camera for your entertainment. That's the drill. We've done it a number of times. He is settled down. For the moment, he seems to be quiescent. So let's just see how long that lasts. Let's give it a shot. The first thing I'd like to do is to point you in the direction of the Patreon, where I got a pile of stuff for you to download, decades worth of my writing there for your immediate perusal. But let us get down to the business at hand, which is Fantastic Force number 1 from fall 1994. Fall 1994. I don't know. Maybe it seems like a little bit late to be shipping a Fantastic Four spinoff into the 90s bull market, 1994. Well, you know, they were still selling comics in 1994. The stores were closing. Sales were falling. So they were certainly selling more comics in 94 than they would be in 96 or 97. But at this point, we're well on to the offensive siege part of the 90s, where everyone seems to be in some type of open retreat. And that means, for Marvel, they're putting out a great deal of books that have no real support in the marketplace and no real hope of gaining a foothold, because they just don't have the talent bench to staff all the books they're putting out. It's obvious. At the time, even as a kid, it was obvious they were just putting out books to put out books because, and this is the number one essential fact of Marvel historically as a publisher, is that they regard every inch of territory as contested space. Every inch that has a Superman comic on it is an inch that could have a Marvel comic on it. So when they have anything resembling an open remit to flood the market and try to pick up market share, that's what they're going to do. And certainly, everyone was scrambling. Marvel in the 90s was, stuck in a game of musical chairs with the rest of the comic book industry. The chairs were disappearing. So, of course, they were going to be shipping Fantastic Four with this gatefold foil cover. Not a bad-looking cover, as these things go. Now, you may be wondering, who is the Fantastic Force? I may have heard of the Fantastic Force. I may have stumbled across the legend, but I don't know the facts. So, just what is going on here and why? Well, the fact is, this came out towards the tail end of what was, objectively speaking, a rather successful run on the Fantastic Four by Tom DeFalco and Paul Ryan. It's a run that's definitely come in for some reevaluation in recent years. It was a run of quiet and thoughtful virtues in an era not necessarily hospitable to, the quiet and thoughtful virtues of a Bronze Age throwback, with an emphasis on stuff like long-term plotting and characterization. It was definitely a really enjoyable run of comic books, month in, month out. It kept us on the edge of our seats if you were on board the Fantastic Four during a period when it was not the coolest book on the stands, but it was very readable. And it kept you coming back with good cliffhangers, no small thing. That's one of the great ingredients of the classic era Lee and Kirby, is even if it doesn't end on a strict cliffhanger, it still usually ends with a to be continued during the prime of their run on that book. So it sold a lot better than people probably thought because, it was still a book that sold on what was left of the newsstand. It struggled when the newsstand went away, but, it's not the only book that did. Anyway, these are characters who appeared first in the DeFalco and Ryan Fantastic Four. Some of them. A couple of them are created for this book. Psylord, he's Franklin Richards. At the time, Franklin Richards had basically had the whole Cable shtick. He was kidnapped by a time traveler and then returned a few moments later as a teenager. So the teenage Franklin Richards was just a member of the supporting cast for a few years, and then at the very end of it, they redid it. They brought the kid version back because, of course, they were going to. So he's leading it up with Huntara, Devlor, and Vibraxis. Now, I think Vibraxis has showed up a few times over the years because he's a Wakandan character. So I think he showed up a few times during the Christopher Priest run of Black Panther and subsequently, just because, the number of named Wakandan supporting characters for, that setting was, not that large. Oh, and the gargoyles. People still love these guys. Still have never seen an episode of this. And I think the Fantastic Four are going through one of their periodic, or are they? I don't know. These images from the past are all that remain of the Fantastic Four. Oh, I think maybe the deal is that they were they in the time stream? There was a long time travel story sometime around issue 390 of the book. They were, I think, lost in time or chasing someone through time or something. It was very involved. I read it all, but many decades ago. So, the interesting thing about Fantastic Four, and the reason why it's maybe still worth flipping through for a chuckle now and again, is it's written by Tom Brevoort and Mike Kanterovich. Mike Kanterovich is probably not a name you're familiar with, but Tom Brevoort is probably a name you're familiar with. He wrote a fair amount of comics in the 90s because they staffed the line with a lot of writers, or with editors and assistant editors. And they took it way too far. A large chunk of the line was being written by staffers. And it was recognized that that was a problem. But they went way too far the other way. And now there's no freelancing from editorial at all. And I think that's a big mistake. I think that's a big mistake, and it shows in the quality of the books themselves. I think there was definitely a happy medium that at its best, Marvel and DC both managed to have good books written by people who were good writers and occasionally even good artists, but who also were good editors. And the reason why they were able to get, people like Archie Goodwin and Denny O'Neil to work as editors is they let them also continue to write comic books. And so they knew what they were doing from every step of the path. And now there's no real incentive at the larger companies, at least, for freelancers to take any kind of editorial career path. It just does not seem like it happens anymore. And part of it has to do with, location. It's a lot more decentralized, virtual, in terms of networking and all that stuff. But I still maintain the line is healthier when all the editors do write the occasional comic book and know how to do it, understand the frustrations, understand the limitations from the other side of the fence. I think it makes for better comics in the same way as, under the classical schema of Freudian analysis, the analyst is encouraged to see their own analyst to be the subject of the treatment. I've always thought that was, a pretty novel understanding of how to develop in a profession. And it's something that comic book editors used to do as well. They used to come more from the creative class. And now it seems like they really have made editing much more of a management level position as opposed to, something you would want to be involved in if you have any creative aspirations. And I think the books suffer for it. The editors should be creative. They should have creative outlets. So they don't, so you don't get stuck in a situation where they're writing the books over the, protestations of the creative team, which is, we're talking about 90s Marvel. That happened a few times. Pogs, we're deep in Pog territory, folks. Definitely the NFTs of the 90s here. Because when all the money had run out of all the other collectible markets, they just started inventing stuff. And it did not last because the game was not that good. So, yeah, it's who's drawing this rodeo? Dante Bastianoni, whose name you may have heard, but he has drawn nicer looking comics than this. I think this was earlier in his career. Inked by Ralph Cabrera. John Workman lettering. Always nice to see John Workman, even if, the book itself. It's not unreadable. It's actually, as with a lot of profoundly bad Marvel comics, it's still essentially readable, which is almost kind of damning in and of itself. But, I remember I liked this character was interesting, and another one comes along, Zarathustra. She's fun. But I don't think anyone, like I say, with the exception of Vibraxis, because he had a bit of an in with T'Challa there, none of these guys ever really did much. And like I say, Psylord, the Psylord version of Franklin Richards, they've had other versions of adult Franklin Richards since then. And the Power Rangers are probably just hitting their stride here. Football cards. Is it my imagination, or have football cards just gone completely over to catering towards adult buyers? All the ads I see are, relatively high-end, contemporary trading card collectibles. You can't just buy a pack of cheap football cards at 7-Eleven like you used to be able to buy a comic book at 7-Eleven. And yet, strangely, comic books are still relevant in a way that sports cards really aren't, even though they do still make them. It seems like 30 or 40 years ago, a store that had a comic book line and a gaming line would also have sports cards. Whereas now it seems like sports cards really got wedged out of, the comics, gaming, pop culture, manga, anime, Funko line that, a good, healthy comic book store is probably going to be selling a fair amount of those products, and sports cards aren't part of that bundle anymore. Whereas when I was a kid, they definitely were. Sports cards and comic books were often seen together. And usually if you went into one of those combo stores, it might not be the best comic book store. Maybe they'd have a few long boxes and some new books. Not always, but that's a nice claw. Classic looking claw. See, it wasn't an incompetent comic book, and this is in places a downright, nice looking comic book because Bastianoni knows what he's doing. He's a very competent presence on the page. Here's that Captain Universe ad again. Every time I see it, I regret that I didn't send it in. Because it's expensive now. You run across that in a long box. Probably cost you at least a few dollars for a rogue story I don't have. I'm not like a completist or anything, but if you put her on the cover, what am I supposed to do? So yeah, they're fighting Claw. This is actually, I will say, this is by contemporary standards, a fairly well-drawn comic book. And there's lots of editor's notes because this is very deep in what was going on. All these characters, like I say, they're being spun off from that iteration of the Fantastic Four, which was really dense read month to month. And there were a ton of characters, so yeah, they had a few sitting around that they could throw together in a spin-off. Yeah, what are we doing here? Super snacks and super snack tins when you buy Nabisco cookies and crackers. I get to see this purple or magenta dude wrestling a bull. That's fun. Action-packed. It keeps you turning the pages. There's definitely a virtue to that kind of storytelling. If you have a decent enough artist, just give the kids a good, interesting fight sequence that keeps your attention throughout the issue. Harder than it looks to do it decently. It's not an incompetent comic book. Did the world need another Fantastic Four comic book with these jokers? In 1994, not in 1994, not in any year. But, it lasted, I think, maybe a year and a half. I want to say. I only bought a couple issues because I was all in on Fantastic Four. It was one of my favorite books. Fantastic Four is always one of my favorite books. Fantastic Force, I was not on board for that. I'm sorry. But that's, that just goes to show there just were more books than customers. Although, like I say, the subscription form has shrunk precipitously. Weird Science. We had a bullpen bulletin back here, didn't we? Oh, where is it? They put it towards the front of the book? Okay. Where is it? It's hiding. I just want to look through the bullpen bulletins. Teach the children. There we go. All right, so this is from this period where, as I say, Marvel was still publishing way too many comic books. Like, way too many comic books. But that was a very conscious attempt just to have more books on the shelf during a bear market, which is the Marvel, how to publish comics the Marvel way. All right. So, yeah, they had a Annex. He was a guy who, he premiered in that Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man annual that was the same year as Bloodlines, when Marvel introduced a number of characters as well, but they didn't even try to put them all together in a story. It was just, hey, here's a bunch of yahoos, and they were all terrible. Annex, awful. They were publishing some Disney at this point. Beauty and the Beast. Barbara Slate working on Beauty and the Beast there. She was doing a lot of their Disney and Barbie books. Steve Scrose is already on cable with Jeff Loeb. Conan Saga still chugging along. Conan Saga, best bang for your buck in the back issue bins. Black and white Conan. in magazine format. The first 10 have Barry Windsor Smith in black and white. Yeah, oh boy, yeah, you want those. You do want those. If I ever get a full set of those together, you better believe we're doing them on the channel. But they are kind of hard to find. Darkhawk is up to, oh, that's a very dark background in that. 45. So Darkhawk only has 5 issues left. Deadpool, we're coming up to the end of the first Deadpool series. No, the second with Waid and Ian Churchill. Doctor Who is still being published. Force Works, number 5. There's another book that there just wasn't a market for. Namor is almost to the end of his run. We're going to see the knife coming down on a number of these books here. Inexplicably, another issue of Punisher Armory, I think. Yeah, Punisher Armory made it to 10. I think maybe there's 1 or 2 issues towards the end of the run I don't have. But strangely enough, I have most of Punisher Armory. It's an interesting series. Solo had his own limited series. The guy who was in the Deadpool Mercs. He didn't really do much for like 20 years between his solo series here and appearing in the Deadpool. Spider-Man 2099 is up to 25, so they're about to lose Rick Leonardi and Al Williamson. And what's Stan saying in his soapbox? What's the story behind my usage of the word Excelsior? Well, we're really hitting the hard news. Okay, so this is an interesting news line here. If you want to see what was going on at this period in the history of the industry, it was sort of a growing pains period in one respect because they didn't really know what the format and price was that was going to settle for a few years. And the proof is, the proof of this, uncertainty. Marvel raises its quality on the mega popular X-Men line, beginning with titles shipping this month. The X-Men family of books will be available in the new deluxe format, featuring full bleed printing, where the art comes all the way to the edge of the pages, on special coated stock, with computer color separations, with all sorts of new visual effects. These books, Cable, Excalibur, Uncanny, Wolverine, X-Force, X-Factor, Generation X, X-Men. Yours for only $1.95. But hey, if you still want to read the books in their current newsprint editions, we'll be making them available to you too for the usual $1.50 price. The standard editions of the titles will ship a mere 2 weeks following their deluxe editions. This is a big experiment. We don't know if the majority of you will like the enhanced versions or the plain white vanilla versions. And in all probability, only one version will survive. It's up to you. Please let us know which way you want to go to get your monthly dose of mutant madness. And, well, history spoke rather conclusively, and this experiment did not last for very long. I think I have a couple of the newspaper editions, but I don't even think they were shipping the newsprint editions. Or maybe I don't think they were shipping the newsprint editions to the newsstand, because I think I remember buying the glossy books at the newsstand, but I may also be just really old. I don't remember. The Fantastic Four may have disbanded. See, they'd been disbanded for like 5 issues or something. But their legacy lives on in Fantastic Force, an all-new monthly series, which we just looked through. Prowler's getting a series with, oh man, I forgot. Now I want this, because this actually has Bill Reinhold penciling and inking himself. Now suddenly I really want to go back, because I don't think I bought that at the time, because, the Prowler. But I've definitely come to rate Bill Reinhold a lot higher now than I used to. I'd say now he's one of my favorite guys, period. All right. Impulse, number 2 from 95, is it? May 95, so that would have been like late winter 95. This book, it was actually quite popular. It lasted for the rest of the decade. So it tucked a good little run under its belt. And then, for some reason, DC just decided they did not want to have this character anymore. So they took a popular character who had supported a book for many years and was a member of multiple teams, and they just decided to not be interested in that version of the character anymore, even though he had a perfectly decent-sized fan base. He premiered in comic books written by Mark Waid and drawn by Mike Wieringo, and his solo book here was drawn by a young Umberto Ramos. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember if we've ever looked at an issue of Impulse. We have to have looked at an issue of Impulse on this show. I know because we read an issue of Impulse on the Tech Talk a long time ago, and people, that was a very popular episode, as these things go. People like this guy. People still like this guy. And yet they just don't want to give us this guy ever again. Admittedly, ran into the perennial comic book problem of the fact that this guy was a young teenager when we first saw him, and then eventually he's not a young teenager anymore, and he's sort of vestigial to purposes, and that happens with a lot of sidekicks and younger characters in this industry. And they still don't really have a good answer. Any good answer they come up with is piecemeal, just trying to figure out how to keep popular characters around, even after they may have outgrown their remit. But admittedly, this isn't a character necessarily that you could expect to see in his 30s still acting like this. Now, I have no idea when the last time this guy showed up. I know there's a lot of Flash characters appearing in Flash right now, because I was picking up the book for the Mike Deodato run. I don't necessarily think I'm going to keep on it if he's going to be gone from here on out, because I was kind of buying the book for him. They always put Aerosmith ads in comic books. Not every rock band rated comic book ads, but it seemed like Aerosmith, this is a big box set with, mid-90s 20-bit digital remastering job with all the old, the original albums. This ad ran for a while. So, Mark Waid, Umberto Ramos, Wayne Faucher on inks, Chris Eliopoulos on lettering, Tom McCraw, colorist. Impulse created by Waid and Wieringo. So, this is not the first book that Ramos did. He'd actually been around for a while. This was his first big series that was pushing him. And this was a popular book. And you can really see here the influence, maybe a little bit buried later on, but the early 90s, the Batman animated style, he's got a little bit of that here to start with, which was definitely, popular, slightly controversial style that began to, seep into the regular books towards the mid-90s. At first, I think I mentioned this before, a lot of people did not warm to the animated series at first, because it looked like, it does have a very cartoony, bold look. It didn't look like Frank Miller, and there's that contingent. Maybe they're a little bit quieter now because they're older, but at least how it used to be. Well, it doesn't look like Frank Miller. Why do I want to bother? Reboot. Now, there's a show that I've never seen any of, but man, it had fans. I think it still has fans somewhere or other. Early CGI stuff, so it was at least interesting to look at. Really made the most of that aesthetic. More of these Soulson compilation books, which I'm guessing now, looking at them, really, they must have put a lot of these ads over the years, and Marvel and DC stuff. So I don't know what he's doing. He's running through walls, which is a Flash pastime since way back. So the premise for the Impulse series is that he is being parented by this guy named Max Mercury, who was one of, many Golden Age heroes who had speed powers. And one of Waid's advancements in the book was he really brought a number of those characters into the book's present day, developed them. Jesse Quick ended up going on and being in a number of stories. Max Mercury got a bit of a following, although I don't think he's necessarily been in a lot recently. But they moved down, actually, into the Deep South, if I recall correctly. They're in Alabama, so it's a slightly different milieu for a superhero comic. Oh, and this was the year one annuals with Origins. So we're to the... Marv Wolfman is writing this, but I want to say Wolfman's gone at some point before 0 Hour. He finally leaves the Titans and they relaunch it without him. Or they launch a new team without him. Greg Land arc, so it's probably not terrible. The Ray, he managed at least one annual with Christopher Priest writing, Oscar Jimenez art, early Oscar Jimenez art. So one of the reasons this book was fun was that it really focused a lot more than most of superhero books at the time. It focused on just the tribulations of this weird guy having to grow up with superpowers. Oh, Sovereign 7. We looked at the first issue of that a while back on the TikTok. Man, all the will in the world could not make this a readable comic book. You just see it's nice cartooning. Ramos is someone who, from the very beginning, knew what he was about. And it was about putting a Bigfoot, a literal Bigfoot, Japanese influence, but also, animated influence right into the mainstream. And certainly, he went on to draw lots and lots and lots of Spider-Man. And his work, if anything, has just been getting more and more cartoony over the years. He never held back as far as that goes. Excellent artist, still to this day. This is funny, if I recall correctly. Max Mercury starts developing these groupies, these women who follow him around when he jogs around town because he's a silver fox. And that's sort of the joke, that he is very popular. Even though he's an older guy, he gets around. So yeah, it was a fun book with interesting characters that people liked, that had lives and personalities, and it's not like people don't still write comic books like that anymore, but it's worth pointing out when you do come across it. I mean, even Mark Waid doesn't really. Maybe if Mark Waid did another volume of Impulse, he could do it, but that's not how he is, writing comic books these days. So he's encountering some sort of, good old boy terrorists? I don't know. Another Christopher Priest series, I think. Triumph. They pushed him for a few months. He was their attempt to make something out of the mid-90s Justice League. He was a character who had been lost in time. One of their early attempts at what they would later do with the Sentry, in which Mark Waid would actually revisit this idea for an Avengers story decades later. But he's a character who's around, ostensibly, for the purposes of this story, for the earliest Justice League adventures, and then for, I don't remember, do not ask me to remember this man's story. I don't even know if I ever knew it. But for whatever reason, he is erased from time, pops back into the present day, and hijinks ensue. And, you can probably imagine this book didn't last very long, I don't think. Oh, they were pushing Guy going back to the JLA. They were really, this run of Justice League, they were on issue 100, and this book had changed so much since the early, Giffen and DeMantis run. It was on fumes, and they were still, I think, I want to say maybe a year or so out from the Grant Morrison Howard Porter run, which would go in and just floor the entire industry. No one was ready, straight up. I'm serious. That book, we're not just talking in hindsight. At the time, it hit like a thunderbolt, and it blew everyone's socks off, and it reoriented the whole of mainstream comics at a time when, DC definitely profited by making big moves. Marvel was floundering. So yeah, making a big push with, JLA, with a hotshot British writer. Yeah, it reoriented the attention of the comic book industry in a period where Marvel was suffering. So yeah, it was the state of the art for pretty much the entirety of its run. And you can see, prior to that, they were dealing with the Volderian Guy Gardner here. Very medium wattage stories. That's nice. Yeah, you see, it's just page after page of Umberto Ramos drawing, fun superpower stuff. How much action can you handle every week? This is when they were really pushing. You get a Superman book every week, and they're all one story in order. This was the Triangle era. So you have 4 Superman books, and you got Steel and Superboy. Although Steel and Superboy were not Triangle books. They had their own identities, telling their own stories. But, the 90s was very good for Superman. I think I had already tapped out of the Legion. After 0 Hour, I was with the Legion for a little while, but I don't know, after a while I just, I needed to drop things, and at that point, I wasn't going to the comic book store enough to justify trying to keep track of the reboot Legion here. But yeah, the first stretch of the reboot Legion was good stuff. I like this comically large Dagwood sandwich that Bart is eating here. And here's one of the New Blood. Interesting to flip through if you run across it, just because it has Adam Paulina art. I've never seen this. So I might pick it up if I see it in a quarter box or something, just for the, pre-X-Force Adam Paulina and, Jeff Loeb. But what can you do? Oh, my goodness. Night's End. There's Hawk on the very end of it, the trade paperback, with a cover painting by Graham Nolan and Brian Stelfreeze. Oh, I don't remember that piece. I don't know if I've seen it. Or I probably have seen it, but I don't remember it. Okay. What was Stargate. Oh, boy. Fun times. People like Stargate, but people like the show. People don't really care that much about the movie, necessarily. Kind of like Buffy in that regard, I guess. All right. Let's look at some Spawn. Some vintage Spawn. Spawn 16. Early Spawn. Not as early as you might think, however, because these issues were printed out of order. I want to say, man, is there he actually had a diagram in the back about the order to read, like half a year's worth of Spawn stuff that came out. Not really sequentially. Oh, pinups. Or maybe I'm just absolutely making that up. Anyway, so not only was it published out of order, but it was published with guest creators. And not just any guest creators. Grant Morrison Greg Capullo, with inks by Dan Panosian and Art T-Bear. Yeah, Grant Morrison and Greg Capullo together on Spawn. Did I get your attention? Now, I wish I could tell you that this is as good as your expectations might be from that setup, but this is 3 issues of Spawn where they introduce a new guy. Not those guys. We know these guys. These look like the Violators brothers. Are they the Violators brothers who we met in the miniseries? Of the Fleabag brothers. Anyway, don't ask me what was going on in Spawn at this point. I read the word balloon, certainly at the time. I think my mom was probably smarter than me, though, because I don't know how much attention she paid to the word balloons. And she enjoyed Spawn quite a bit, so I think it was a secret there. Once you can just get into the groove of, the vibe, it's all about vibe. Spawn is a creature of the vibe. All right. So we got soldiers basically just getting demolished by Fleabag. And so, of course, because it's Spawn, we get to see grisly on-screen deaths. Grant Morrison is having fun, just like Alan Moore had fun. Alan Moore, I think, had a lot of fun writing The Violator. I think he maybe had like 2 or 3 Violator stories in him, but you can tell that he's using the character to his utmost. What is going on with the color here? Oh, yeah. Steve Olive. Ollie Optics. Very, very early computer outfit. Using teals. What is this, a late 80s DC book with all this teal? There's our boy. Cut to New York City. High above a twilight maze of dingy rain-swept alleyways, the Spawn broods. There you go. Can't beat it. And, it looks like they pretty much got the hang of Spawn, although this early in the series, I know that, if I recall correctly, Todd was really working with everyone still very closely on Spawn material, let alone an issue of the series. So there's not necessarily a lot of Grant Morrison in this. What you see is Grant Morrison sort of playing with the Spawn cliches, like there's some bit of unimaginable cruelty that is happening in an alleyway, and Spawn's if he has anything resembling an actual like superheroic mission, it's that he generally takes care of the homeless people around him. The rest of his story is kind of, just his garbage coming back to bug him in the present. So yeah, we're dealing with the continuity, established by Angela, where we've established what Heaven looks like, what Heaven's operatives look like. We have a satellite orbiting the Earth, run by angels, with for their various security apparatus here. And here's Jason Wynn fighting a ninja, the classic supervillain, fighting a underling in a subplot. The classic bit of character exposition where your scheming mastermind villain takes out an underling or something in a practice dojo. So, yeah, something happens. He's taken to space, and it's kind of this sequence could maybe be a bit cleaner, but he's kidnapped by the angels, And they're like, you want some power? We'll give you some heavenly power. And of course, if you know anything about Spawn, it's, there's no such thing as power without a lot of drawbacks. And Spawn is just going nuts, digging up his grave and actually finding his body in it. God help me, what am I? What have you done to me? So very, very classic Spawn angst. They make him into this golden. Is this anti-Spawn? Yeah, anti-Spawn. Big letters, which isn't a terrible, derivative logo, costume for the character there with the cross motif because he's sponsored by the Angels. So a lot of the other Image books are still on single-digit numbering. Spawn, he was up to 16 already. And I remember at the time, it was a big deal that McFarlane was actually laying down significant track that Spawn started to stack up the numbers there. Pretty soon it was issue 50. Pretty soon it was issue 100. They just had 350 the other day. That's what Todd McFarlane cares about. And, oh yeah, it was the Batman Spawn crossover. That's why McFarlane, who was at least ostensibly still the book's main penciler at this time, although not for very much longer, in a way, this Capullo mini run here, this 3 issues with Morrison, that was his tryout for the book. Because he does, at some point, I don't know, I think the Angela miniseries may have been right after this, the Angela limited series that Neil Gaiman came back for. But pretty soon after that, in the 20s or the 30s, I don't remember, Greg Capullo begins penciling and McFarlane moves on to inks. And the book doesn't miss a step in terms of looking dynamite. So yeah, Bloodstrike, that was on issue 5, and Rob Liefeld's already brought Keith Giffen in. Codename Strike Force, issue 1. Silvestri writing for Peterson and Panosian, early Peterson. The Max is up to 6, actually. Sam Keith at the ground running. Union, that's not one we talk about often these days. Mark Teixeira art. Wildcats is up to 6. This is the ongoing series, so Jim Lee is still on it, but not for too much longer. Issue 2 of the Cyberforce ongoing, which is a part of a crossover with the aforementioned Wildcats. Troll by Rob Liefeld and very early Jeff Matsuda work here. Yeah, I forgot he was an Extreme Studios guy, but I guess he was. Prophet, but it's spelled R-P-O-P-H-E-T. Prophet 2. Liefeld and Panosian. Really the book that put Panosian on the map after he'd been, slinking around Marvel for a while up to that point. Vanguard, which was an older character who had been published in 80s alongside some of Larson's early Dragon material. And he still, to this day, shows up as a supporting dink in, one of many characters like Wildstar. Wildstar still shows up in Savage Dragon periodically. Savage Dragon up to issue 6 of the ongoing series. So they're talking about merchandise here and the blah, blah, blah. Terry Fitzgerald is saying, the Spawnmobile Hot Wheels. I remember that. Debuted in Philadelphia in October. Only 100,000 were produced. 50,000 will be sold through Walmarts across America, and the other 50,000 will make their way to Comic-Cons, where either Todd or Al Simmons, a.k.a. Spawn, will attend. Interesting. I vaguely remember they made a big deal about that because that was at the very, the tip of the iceberg for the 90s for Todd, which was putting out a lot of Spawn stuff. So here's Spawn with I think that's one of Don Simpson's characters here. This is dated 92, so this must have been sitting on a shelf for a while. Brad Gorby. Don't necessarily know who that is. But he usually had at least one or two pinups. New guys, veterans, he just likes putting pinups in his comics. And he always had meaty letters pages. Long letter. For My Sins, I think at the time, I think, For My Sins, I think I actually read the letters pages every month, and that's a lot of work. Upon attending Comic Fest 93 in Philadelphia and watching you crank out signature after signature, I noticed that nearly no one thanked you. This disturbed me for some reason which at the time I could not figure out. This thought was quickly discarded as I was having too much fun to worry about, but after several hours of incredibly intense anticipation, it finally came time to have my comic signed. I handed my father a copy of Spawn 1 and stood clutching a copy of Spider-Man #1. And as the line snaked around, my excitement grew. Finally, I stood before you in awe, and I handed you the comic. My mind was racing, and the only words that my lips could form were, "You're the greatest." You said thanks and quickly turned your attention to the next person in line, who was my father. My father watched intently as you quickly signed your name, and as you finished, he put his hand out and said sincerely, "Thank you very much." Your expression of surprise and your reaction of amazement hit me like a ton of bricks, and as you shook his hand, it suddenly dawned on me that I, too, like so many of your other fans, had failed to say thank you. Needless to say, I felt like crap. After a great deal of thought, I realized that all the signatures, all the pictures, all that you did was not necessary. You didn't have to do a single bit of it. You did it all for your fans. Now, as I look back, I wish to express my concern with my fellow Todd McFarlane aficionados. I hope that everyone out there understands that despite your fame, you are still a human being who commands respect and deserves thanks. Because of this, I wish to formally thank you and your staff for producing such an enjoyable and high-quality comic. Also, I personally wish to thank you for signing my comic book. I don't take it as a personal slight when people don't say thank you or really don't get in that much of a discussion. Unfortunately, the way conventions are set up for me right now, trying to do as many signatures as I can, given the allotted time, doesn't really allow a lot of time for conversation. Really, one of the downsides that I don't think people realize of actually becoming that popular is that I don't have that much time to talk to people in my lines like I once did about which books they like and those they didn't and their reasons for both. For the most part, I don't feel that it is necessary for the fans to say thank you to me. I usually say thank you to most of the people who bring me up a book because it is you guys buying your books that give me my job. So if I didn't say it to you then, I'll say it to you now. Thank you. And, you know, in hindsight, you can't say that he didn't walk the walk there. And it didn't seem to matter as much to me as at the time, but now I look back and see, oh, wait, yeah. He was all about his fans from day one. And they made him a very rich man, so I ain't saying shit. Nice work if you can get it. If you're ever lucky enough to be in a position to have fans, appreciate them. That is a lesson you can learn from Mr. Todd McFarlane, if nothing else. Shadowhawk, The Secret Revealed, the trade paperback. So they've already got a trade out for Shadowhawk 2. So, yeah, Jim Valentino, he was striking while the iron was hot. He did not go on to do very many Shadowhawk stories, but for a couple of years there, he did. He did the Shadowhawk. So they're doing a tour behind that Killer Instinct crossover I just mentioned. Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri. The Max versus the Pit. Eep. Nice looking comic book. Okay, we flipped through an issue of Spawn. We pandered. So now let's just really enjoy ourselves with a nice, relaxing issue of Team America. Only lasted 12 issues. This is issue 10. Of course, I have the whole run. I believe we've already looked at Team America, at least one issue on this channel before. Now, who's the creators here? This is Stephen Grant, Alan Kupperberg, and Vince Colletta. Now, that's definitely the creator team you pull in 1982 for when the book has to be out the door at a certain point, and you want a couple solid pros. That's your team in 1982. Stephen Grant, I mean, he did a lot of Dog's Body, fill-ins, final issues for a number of Marvel titles across the line at this period. And Paul Kupperberg, I want to say he drew a fair amount of fill-in work around this time. And it looks kind of cool. It's very, very, very old school AD&D plastic models from the MPC company. They dropped that license very early, but those look kind of fun. So, more stunt writing action, as you like it, in the Mighty Marvel manner. Some interesting dice panels. This Bubble Yum ad. They pushed this at us for a while. A lot of things happening on these pages. A lot of people running into problems. Someone falls out of a building. Or no, someone falls out of a building and then only clouds hit the ground, or only his clothes hit the ground and he disappears in a cloud. Interesting. Interesting. You know, the Team America group, they're going to have their work ahead of them. An ancient ranch outside of Vegas. So one of the team wakes up out in the middle of the desert in this weird ranch, which appears to be filled with criminals or kidnapped victims. I can't tell. But he's in stocks. So, yeah, this is a weird one. And my goodness, you can tell. Vince Colletta's inking it, so the women look pretty good. You can tell he put a lot of work into drawing that woman. And then he just sort of did the rest of it while he was eating or something. I've defended 80s Vince Colletta. Once he gets on Dazzler, I think he actually, believe it or not, starts to give a crap again. It's an odd thing to see. You know, give him a book with a pretty girl in it, and he'll do pretty all right. So they're doing some kind of something, or I don't know. They're just standing around talking. So yeah, all these people are kidnapped, I guess, to work. Are they being kidnapped to be slaves? I can't tell. I mean, you know, maybe if I read the comic. You know, it's been a while. I don't know if I even paid that much attention to the plot the first time I went through my run of Team America. But man, if Marvel called me up tomorrow, and said, hey, we're bringing back the Thunder Riders. You in? Of course. I'd be there in a hot flash. They're mutants. Team America, who later became the Thunder Riders because Team America was copyrighted, they're mutants. That's their whole shtick. Claremont confirmed in New Mutants. And yet, I did not see them on Krakoa. That's a healthy subscription form there. I know you're sick of me paying attention. Bringing out the calipers for the subscription form. Well, that's how you judge the health of the company in these periods. And now they don't have subscription forms at all, so what does that tell you? Team America has forced my hand. After they return to the city, the police will come for me. But even before that can happen, Las Vegas will be annihilated. Oh, so, it's the Marauder. It's that guy. He's got to sneak onto the plane. Well, I guess he's got, like, poison or a bomb or something. He's going to destroy Vegas, and it's up to the Marauder to hang on to this plane and take this guy out. Las Vegas is doomed. Oh, speak of the devil. Yeah, because the Thunder Riders, who were Team America, they will show up in the first, 6 or 7 issues of New Mutants, and straight up, like, I ain't joking. Professor X, he meets the Thunder Riders, and he drops the New Mutants cold. It's like, look, these guys are cooler than you. I'm sorry. I mean, have you seen them? They ride motorcycles for a living. You're a bunch of children. No, I want to hang out with the motorcycle people. I can understand that. That's like the one thing Professor X has ever done where I can just, yeah, okay, I get it, man. Your actions make sense in this situation. Not necessarily something you can usually say about Professor X. So, he's got this deadly dust that turns people to... That seems handy. How come we've never encountered that since then? That seems like something another supervillain would want to pick up. Lakeside Tattoos are here. Gary Larson thought he had all the answers. That's very interesting that they put Gary Larson's name in this ad for these old Atari games. And Super Cobra video game cartridge. Coming soon from Parker Brothers. So where was that? There we go. So... they're still pushing Bizarre Adventures. That lasted into the 30s. Man. It was a stacked magazine, though. Mark Grunwald, Stephen Grant, Paul Smith, Michael Carlin, Larry Hammond, Marie Severin, Bill Sienkiewicz, Al Milgram, Howard Chaykin. Just available for you to buy at your newsstand. I think it was a newsstand book. Had to be a newsstand book. And they're advertising the Submariner crossing over with the Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man newspaper strip. Every once in a while they acknowledge that was a thing that existed. They're into the period where they're going full in on the special editions because they're doing the Jim Starlin Warlock and the Steve Englehart and Frank Brunner Doctor Strange, which probably worth picking up if you run across and you haven't already read those stories. Star Slammers graphic novel. He'd do some more Star Slammers later in the 90s, but he didn't do very much of them. Oh, and this is the month of the Dark Crystal adaptation that we looked at the current printing, the reprinting of that from Archaea on one of the Hey Tegan, What's in the Bag shows. It's the afternoon of Shooter at Marvel. We have not yet reached Secret Wars. The Secret Wars will consume the last 3 years of Jim Shooter's tenure, front to back. The Secret Wars and the new universe. That's still a couple years in the future from here. What do they got? Stanley gives birth. Another gripe I'd like to get off my chest is the indiscriminate use of deceptive copy just to get the reader's attention. What's a reader to think when he or she sees bomb hits Avengers Mansion plaster all over an Avengers cover, only to find that the story inside is about Simon Williams trying out his new nightclub act on his hapless friends? Admittedly, that's a funny example. All right. Well, that was fun. We looked at a fun stack of comics, didn't we? What all did we look at here? All right. So the first thing I'd like to do is not to point you in the direction of Patreon, to point you in the direction of your local comic book store so you can get a copy of the Comics Journal Yearbook Best of 2023. It's packed full of writing and interviews on the best comic books of last year, including an essay by me on the subject of Dan Clowes, and specifically his new book, Monica. So, yes, something to look for, something to order, so you can support me and support the Comics Journal. If you like my stuff, my writing, my videos, whatever, check out the Patreon. Got tons of stuff there for you to download right this minute. Put up daily comic book reviews on TikTok and Instagram, updated every dang day. I do a podcast with Claire Napier. It's called Udder Madness. It's about Top Cow Comics. We just put up a brand new bonus episode about the brand new Witchblade #1. That's up on the Patreon for you to check out to your heart's content. What else? I should have a new piece up or coming up on the Journal website here imminently on Godzilla. Look for that. What else? I think that's everything. Do you need more? I've thought that I had a rather quiet summer, but the numbers don't lie, man. I guess I've been busy lately. Have a nice day. Take care of yourself. Be kind to animals. Be kind to small children. Be well and do well. And most importantly, have a nice day.